Cocktail Art History, written by Beth Stubbings and read by Cara Noble. Right. You look fantastic. You're off to a party at an art gallery or museum. You have no reason to be nervous about this party, except you know nothing about art. If you open your mouth about anything in the place, you think you'll sound like an idiot. But take heart. Whether you're going to an exhibit of classical Greek sculpture or abstract expressionist painting, there are a few basic points to remember that will help you say what you mean with confidence. And on that note, do remember that your opinion is just as valid as anyone else's. Someone with years of experience in the art world or an art history professor certainly knows more details than you do. That's their job. But each person's relationship with a work of art may be completely different. No one else can see a work of art through your eyes. The trick is expressing what you see. So, a few basic points. Let's start with a word that will usually be useful no matter what you're looking at. Subject. This is where the labels in the museum or gallery come in handy. They'll usually tell you what the subject of the work is. It might be Lady Cassandra Whitworth, in which case we're probably talking about a portrait. Or it might be number 247, which means you're on your own to figure out what it's supposed to be. Either way, the first step to getting a handle on a work of art is to figure out the subject. How easy or difficult this is will probably depend on how naturalistic the work is. So, what does naturalistic mean? Every work of art, no matter what it's made of or when it was made, is either an emulation of nature or a reaction against nature. What does that mean? That means that artists throughout time see the same world we all do. Trees, mountains, animals, people. When they create their works, they're either trying to reproduce what they see as closely as possible to the original, or to interpret a mountain, house, tree, or whatever it is in an entirely unique way. If you look at a painting and can actually recognize the specific subject, say for example Mount Fuji in Japan, or the Queen of England, then you're looking at a very naturalistic work. But this isn't necessarily a yes or no question. You can probably imagine an impressionist painting without too much trouble, right? Very blurry, but you sort of see the basic idea of flowers, water, a field. So impressionist painting, we would say, is somewhat naturalistic. You can recognize the subject, perhaps with a bit of help from the label. But what about art that isn't at all naturalistic? That's pretty much everything from the 20th century, right? And if you think about it, all those blurry impressionist flowers and bridges were really something of a last gasp for naturalistic art. As photography developed and grew in popularity, it's safe to say that artists drew further and further away from attempting to reproduce nature and began more and more to interpret it. So, if you see a work of art in which you recognize absolutely nothing, it's not naturalistic. It's abstract. The label may say that it's supposed to be a portrait of someone or of a certain building, but you still don't see anything like a person or a building in it. So how does this help you out at a cocktail party? You're standing in front of a work everyone says is quite famous. It looks like various shades of blue on a canvas to you. You study it, tilt your head to the side. You may even back up a few feet to see if something recognizable appears. But whatever you do, you can't see what the fuss is about. Someone at the party asks you what you think. Well, it's famous, isn't it? Don't you have to pretend that it's the most amazing thing you've ever seen? No, not at all. But there's a way to be honest without sounding ignorant or mean-spirited. When you look at the painting, does it make you feel anything? Perhaps all those cool blue tones actually do make you feel calm, relaxed. So maybe the artist was trying to express the feeling they get when they look at the subject, not the visual appearance of the person or building. If the work gives you a strong feeling of some kind, then that's where you would start describing what you think of it to someone. But what if you feel nothing at all? You can still talk about your personal experience of the painting. You don't have to say, my kid could paint better than that, but it really would be more accurate to say, this is a bit abstract for me, I think. It doesn't engage me. You could also say that a work doesn't speak to you. I know it may sound a bit pretentious, but looking at art really does work like a conversation, and the most effective words we can use to describe communication apply to the experience of viewing art. Is it saying something to you or not? If the person you're speaking to is knowledgeable about the work or the artist, they may disagree and tell you their opinion, or give you information that will help you understand what the artist was trying to do. You may learn quite a bit about the history of the work. That knowledge will probably help your intellectual appreciation of the work, but don't forget that your initial emotional reaction is still perfectly valid. On the other hand, you may find naturalistic works unappealing. What if you were standing in front of a painting from the 19th century, depicting a battle or heroic allegory that is more or less meaningless to anyone who was born after 1900? Perhaps you think all the togas and dramatic gestures are silly. How would you go about expressing this? Well, a work like this definitely has something to say, doesn't it? It's definitely trying to speak to you. It's practically shouting. It's saying, look how great this victory was, or look how noble our soldiers were in the face of certain death. So it's not as though it doesn't engage you, right? But is it communicating anything that's really relevant to you? That's where you can start to talk about your reaction. The work is speaking, but if you aren't the intended listener, the message really doesn't mean too much, does it? But give yourself some time to take in the whole painting, and you may find some things that do appeal to you. Look at the details. You may find that the artist did a really good job at capturing the facial expressions of different people in the work. If it's a naturalistic portrait, rather than a big historical scene, you still may find some wonderful little details that appeal to you, like the way the artist managed to express the softness of silk, or the light reflecting on someone's curls. You can appreciate the artist's skill, even if the message doesn't quite come through to you. Soak it all in, and appreciate the good and the bad. If someone asks you what you think, point out the little details that you like, or even something that you think the artist might have included as a subtle joke, like a particularly sour expression on someone in the group portrait. But you don't need to avoid stating your opinion. A work can be interesting without it being to your taste. Just have an idea why you don't like it. One of the words you may find useful here is audience. For most of the history of art, a painting would be commissioned by a patron. In other words, the artist would be hired by a patron to produce a particular work. Portraits are the most obvious example. The artist would usually produce a flattering likeness of the portrait's subject, that is the person in the painting. Who would see it? Who is the audience for a portrait? If you've ever visited a stately home or a castle, you can imagine where portraits usually resided. A portrait hanging in a great hall of a palace would have been seen then by people invited to the palace. The audience would have been the nobility, people of the same class and wealth as the person in the portrait. Do you think you get an historical painting or a portrait the same way that the original audience would? Why or why not? You can say with perfect validity that the painting probably worked better for its original audience, or in its original context, the place and time in which it was originally supposed to be viewed. Or perhaps you can see a basic human theme in the painting that goes beyond its specific historical context or audience. Great! What is it? A mother's grief? Grim determination in the face of unbeatable odds? Romantic passion? But maybe it just makes you laugh. All these silly men running around in togas brandishing swords. So laugh, and feel free to say why. This event or person might have been deadly serious in its day, but it seems comical to you now out of its context. Let's summarise a bit. Everything you see in a museum or art gallery tends to be naturalistic, meaning that you recognise the subject of the painting or sculpture, or abstract, meaning that you can't recognise anything in it. I say tends to be, because not everything is absolutely one or the other. Let's take our example of the Impressionists. You probably see the flowers, the bridge, the water lilies, or whatever. But remember, we also said that it's not as naturalistic as a photograph, right? As art became more abstract over time, it can be a sort of game to see if you recognise objects in a work that is a little abstract and a little naturalistic, like finding shapes in clouds. So enjoy the hunt.